Chapter 10 of Rupert of Hentzau. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. Recording by Andy Minter. Rupert of Hentzau, taken from the Memoirs of Fritz von Tarlenheim, by Anthony Hope. Chapter 10. The King in Strelsau. Mr. Rassendyll reached Strelsau from Zenda without accident about 9 in the evening of the same day as that which witnessed the tragedy of the hunting lodge. He could have arrived sooner, but prudence did not allow him to enter the populous suburbs of the town till darkness guarded him from notice. The gates of the city were no longer shut at sunset as they used to be in the days when Duke Michael was governor, and Rudolf passed them without difficulty. Fortunately, the night, fine where we were, was wet and stormy at Strelsau. Thus there were few people in the streets, and he was able to gain the door of my house still unremarked. Here, of course, a danger presented itself. None of my servants were in the secret. Only my wife, in whom the Queen herself had confided, knew Rudolf, and she did not expect to see him, since she was ignorant of the recent course of events. Rudolf was quite alive to the peril, and regretted the absence of his faithful attendant, who could have cleared the way for him. The pouring rain gave him an excuse for twisting a scarf about his face and pulling his coat collar up to his ears, while the gusts of wind made the cramming of his hat low down over his eyes no more than a natural precaution against its loss. Thus masked from curious eyes, he drew rein before my door, and having dismounted, rang the bell. When the butler came, a strange hoarse voice, half stifled by folds of scarf, asked for the countess, alleging for pretext a message from myself. The man hesitated, as well he might, to leave the stranger alone with the door open and the contents of the hall at his mercy. Murmuring an apology, in case his visitor should prove to be a gentleman, he shut the door and went in search of his mistress. His description of the untimely caller at once roused my wife's quick wit. She had heard from me how Rudolf had ridden once from Strelsau to the hunting lodge with muffled face. A very tall man, with his face wrapped in a scarf and his hat over his eyes, who came with a private message, suggested to her at least a possibility of Mr. Rassendyll's arrival. Helga will never admit that she is clever, yet I find she discovers from me what she wants to know, and I suspect hides successfully the small matters of which she, in her wifely discretion, deems I had best remain ignorant. Being able thus to manage me, she was equal to coping with the butler. She laid aside her embroidery most composedly. "Ah, yes," she said, "I know the gentleman. Surely you haven't left him out in the rain?" She was anxious lest Rudolf's features should have been exposed too long to the light of the hall lamps. The butler stammered an apology, explaining his fears for our goods and the impossibility of distinguishing social rank on a dark night. Helga cut him short with an impatient gesture, crying, "How stupid of you!" and herself ran quickly down and opened the door, a little way only, though. The first sight of Mr. Rassendyll confirmed her suspicions. In a moment, she said, she knew his eyes. "It is you, then!" she cried. "And my foolish servant has left you in the rain. Pray come in. Oh, but your horse!" She turned to the penitent butler, who had followed her downstairs. "Take the baron's horse round to the stables," she said. "I will send someone at once, my lady." "No, no, take it yourself. Take it at once. I'll look after the baron." Reluctantly and ruefully the fat fellow stepped out into the storm. Rudolf drew back and let him pass. Then he entered quickly, to find himself alone with Helga in the hall. With a finger on her lips, she led him swiftly into a small sitting room on the ground floor, which I used as a sort of office or place of business. It looked out on the street, and the rain could be heard driving against the broad panes of the window. Rudolf turned to her with a smile, and bowing, kissed her hand. "The baron what, my dear countess?" he inquired. "He won't ask," said she, with a shrug. "Do tell me what brings you here, and what has happened." He told her, very briefly, all he knew. She hid bravely her alarm at hearing that I might perhaps meet Rupert at the lodge, and at once listened to what Rudolf wanted of her. "Can I get out of the house, and, if need be, back again unnoticed?" he asked. The door is locked at night, and only Fritz and the butler have keys." Mr. Rassendyll's eye travelled to the window of the room. "I haven't grown so fat that I can't get through there," said he. "So we'd better not trouble the butler. He'd talk, you know." "I will sit here all night and keep everybody from the room." "I may come back pursued, if I bungle my work and an alarm is raised." "Your work?" she asked, shrinking back a little. "Yes," said he. "Don't ask what it is, Countess. It's in the Queen's service." "For the Queen I will do anything and everything, as Fritz would." He took her hand and pressed it in a friendly, encouraging way. "Then I may issue my orders?" he asked, smiling. "They shall be obeyed." "Then a dry cloak, a little supper, and this room to myself, except for you." As he spoke, the butler turned the handle of the door. My wife flew across the room, opened the door, and while Rudolf turned his back, directed the man to bring some cold meat or whatever could be ready with as little delay as possible. "Now come with me," she said to Rudolf, directly the servant was gone. She took him to my dressing room, where he got dry clothes. Then she saw the supper laid, ordered a bedroom to be prepared, told the butler that she had business with the Baron, and that he need not sit up if she were later than 11, dismissed him, and went to tell Rudolf that the coast was clear for his return to the sitting room. He came, expressing admiration for her courage and address. I take leave to think that she deserved his compliments. He made a hasty supper, then they talked together, Rudolf smoking his cigar. 11 came and went. It was not yet time. My wife opened the door and looked out. The hall was dark, the door locked, and its key in the hands of the butler. She closed the door again and softly locked it. As the clock struck 12, Rudolf rose and turned the lamp very low. Then he unfastened the shutters noiselessly, raised the window, and looked out. "Shut them again when I'm gone," he whispered. "If I come back, I'll knock like this, and you'll open for me." "For heaven's sake, be careful," she murmured, catching at his hand. He nodded reassuringly, and crossing his leg over the window sill, sat there for a moment listening. The storm was as fierce as ever, and the street was deserted. He let himself down on to the pavement, his face again wrapped up. She watched his tall figure stride quickly along till a turn of the road hid it. Then, having closed the window and the shutters again, she sat down to keep her watch, praying for him, for me, and for her dear mistress the Queen, for she knew that perilous work was afoot that night, and did not know whom it might threaten or whom destroy. From the moment that Mr. Rassendyll thus left my house at midnight, on his search for Rupert of Hentzau, every hour and almost every moment brought its incident in the swiftly moving drama which decided the issues of our fortunes. What we were doing has been told. By now Rupert himself was on his way back to the city, and the Queen was meditating in her restless vigil on the resolve that in a few hours was to bring her also to Strelsau. Even in the dead of night both sides were active, for, plan cautiously and skilfully as he might, Rudolf fought with an antagonist who lost no chances, and who had found an apt and useful tool in that same Bauer, a rascal, and a cunning rascal, if ever one were bred in the world. From the beginning even to the end, our error lay in taking too little count of this fellow, and dear was the price we paid. Both to my wife and to Rudolf himself, the street had seemed empty of every living being when she watched and he set out. Yet everything had been seen, from his first arrival to the moment when she closed the window after him. At either end of my house there runs out a projection, formed by the bay windows of the principal drawing room and of the dining room respectively. These projecting walls form shadows, and in the shade of one of them, of which I do not know, nor is it of moment, a man watched all that passed. Had he been anywhere else, Rudolf must have seen him. If we had not been too engrossed in playing our own hands, it would doubtless have struck us as probable that Rupert would direct Rischenheim and Bauer to keep an eye on my house during his absence, for it was there that any of us who found our way to the city would naturally resort in the first instance. As a fact, he had not omitted this precaution. The night was so dark